In October of 1786, Bavarian police raided the home of a man named Zephyr von Zwack in the city of Landshut and carried away everything they found: letters, membership lists, internal rituals, cipher keys. The documents belonged to an organization that had been officially banned the year before, an order that called its members by the names of Greek and Roman heroes, and sorted them through a graded system of initiations from novice to minerval to illuminatus minor and beyond. The founder had already fled the country, but the papers were enough. Within 6 months, 400 pages of internal writings were published by the Bavarian government. And within a decade, 2 separate authors, one in Scotland and one in France, would use those papers to construct a theory that the French Revolution itself had been orchestrated from a university classroom in Ingolstadt. The man who started it was a law professor. Adam Weishaupt was born on February 6, 1748, in the Bavarian city of Ingolstadt, the seat of one of the oldest universities in German-speaking Europe. His father, a professor of law at the same university, died when Adam was 5 years old. The boy's education was taken over by his godfather, Johann Adam von Eichstätt, a prominent figure in the Bavarian academic establishment and a committed supporter of Enlightenment rationalism. Eichstätt had reorganized the university's curriculum away from Jesuit scholasticism and toward modern philosophy, natural law, and secular governance. The Jesuits, who had controlled Ingolstadt for 2 centuries, did not take kindly to this. The child who would one day create the Illuminati was raised in the crossfire between 2 visions of what knowledge was for. Weishaupt was educated by the Jesuits themselves. He read their books, studied their organizational methods, and absorbed their discipline. He later wrote that he admired their structure even as he rejected their theology. By 25, he was a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt, the first non-Jesuit to hold the position in living memory. He had inherited Eichstätt's chair and Eichstätt's enemies. The Jesuits had been formally suppressed by the Pope in 1773, dissolved as a religious order across most of Catholic Europe. In Bavaria, their influence survived the suppression. Former Jesuits still held university posts, still dominated intellectual life, still resisted the Enlightenment reforms that Eichstätt and his allies had introduced. Weishaupt saw them as the obstacle. He wanted a counterforce. He considered Freemasonry. The Masonic lodges of southern Germany were by the 1770s the most visible network of Enlightenment-friendly thinkers in the region. They offered ritual, secrecy, fraternity, and a philosophical language drawn from the Hermetic and Rosicrucian traditions. Weishaupt visited lodges. He read their literature. He found them disappointing. The lodges in Bavaria, he concluded, were too focused on ceremony and too susceptible to mystical nonsense, particularly the higher degree systems that had been imported from France and that promised their initiates contact with ancient wisdom, alchemical secrets, and communication with hidden superiors. Weishaupt wanted something harder. He wanted a secret society that would train its members in rational thought and deploy them into positions of influence across Bavarian institutions. On May 1, 1776, in a classroom at the University of Ingolstadt, Adam Weishaupt gathered a handful of students and founded a new order. He called them the Perfectibilists. The name did not last. Within months, Weishaupt had renamed the group the Order of the Illuminati, borrowing a term with deep roots in the history of European mysticism, where it had been used for centuries to describe those who had received divine or philosophical light. The founding membership was small, somewhere between 4 and 5 students depending on the source. The aims were grand: the perfection of human nature through education, the gradual elimination of superstition and priestly tyranny, and the promotion of rational self-governance. The method was secrecy. Members were given classical pseudonyms. Weishaupt called himself Spartacus. The early order was not impressive. For the first 3 years, Weishaupt ran it alone, recruiting students one at a time, writing the rituals himself, managing the internal communications, and struggling to keep members interested in what was, at that point, a reading group with a cipher system. The grades were borrowed loosely from Masonic models. A new recruit entered as a novice, moved to minerval, and could eventually reach illuminatus minor. The content of each grade was a mix of philosophy, ethical instruction, and the kind of self-examination exercises that Weishaupt had absorbed from his Jesuit education. The minerval degree, the first rank of substance, centered on structured reading in moral philosophy, classical history, and political theory, followed by written reports in which the student was expected to demonstrate not just comprehension, but personal application. Weishaupt was building a school disguised as a secret society. The cipher system was elaborate for an organization of its size. Members communicated using a substitution code that replaced each letter of the alphabet with a symbol. Cities were given names drawn from classical antiquity. Ingolstadt became Eleusis. Munich became Athens. Bavaria itself was referred to as Greece. Every member adopted a pseudonym from ancient history or mythology. Weishaupt was Spartacus, Zwack was Cato. The classicizing impulse ran deep. It was as though Weishaupt believed that by naming his provincial Bavarian network after the institutions of Greece and Rome, he could will it into becoming something grander than it was. Members were required to submit regular reports on their reading, their moral progress, and their observations about the people around them. The surveillance was mutual. Everyone watched everyone. The order changed when it met a man named Adolf Franz Friedrich Ludwig Knigge, commonly known as Baron Adolf von Knigge. Knigge was a minor German nobleman, a Freemason of high degree, a published author, and a professional networker. He joined the Illuminati in 1780, and within months he had done what Weishaupt alone had failed to do. He rewrote the ritual structure from the ground up. He created new degrees, expanded the grade system into a hierarchy that stretched from the entry-level novice through the Minerval class, and up into a priest grade, a regent grade, and a projected set of mystery degrees at the summit that Weishaupt kept vague on purpose. Knigge gave the order organizational coherence, he gave it ritual drama, and he gave it reach. Between 1780 and 1784, the Illuminati grew from a handful of Bavarian students into an order with members across the German-speaking world. Estimates of total membership vary, and no single number is accepted by all historians, but the range given by scholarly sources runs from several hundred to perhaps 2,000 at the peak. Knigge's strategy was infiltration. Rather than competing with Freemasonry, the Illuminati would enter it from the inside. Knigge, who already held high Masonic rank, recruited lodge members directly, bringing them into the Illuminati as a secret inner order operating behind the Masonic structure. Entire lodges in some German cities were effectively absorbed. Bavarian government officials, university professors, clergymen, minor nobility, and a handful of significant literary and intellectual figures joined the order during these years. The writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was initiated in 1783 under the pseudonym Barruel. The poet and dramatist Johann Christoph Bode, who later translated Masonic texts from French, became one of Knigge's most active collaborators. The Duke of Saxe-Gotha, who would later shelter Weishaupt himself, was counted among the order's sympathizers. For a brief window, the Illuminati were one of the most sophisticated covert networks in European intellectual life. The expansion broke the partnership. Weishaupt and Knigge had disagreed from the beginning about authority. Weishaupt wanted absolute control. He wanted to approve every initiation, review every report, and dictate every ritual text. Knigge wanted a more distributed structure, something closer to the Masonic model in which lodges had local autonomy and leaders were elected rather than appointed. By 1783, the tension had become a full internal crisis. Knigge accused Weishaupt of running the order like a Jesuit general, imposing obedience through surveillance and punishing dissent with expulsion. Weishaupt accused Knigge of overstepping his authority and introducing mystical elements that contradicted the order's rationalist purpose. In 1784, Knigge resigned. He surrendered his Illuminati papers and withdrew from the organization entirely. The irony is that the accusation cut both ways. Weishaupt, the man who had rejected the Jesuits, had built an organization with a command structure that mirrored theirs. Absolute authority at the top. Strict obedience from members below. A system of internal reports that functioned as surveillance. The Jesuits had invented this model to spread Catholicism across the globe. Weishaupt had purposed it to spread Enlightenment rationalism across Bavaria. His critics and his closest collaborator used the same word to describe what he had done. The order had less than a year left. Rumors about the Illuminati had been circulating in Bavaria since the early 1780s. Former members who had been expelled or who had left in disillusionment had talked. Conservative Catholic clergy in Munich, alarmed by reports that university professors and civil servants were participating in a secret rationalist organization, pressed the case to the Bavarian government. On June 22, 1784, Elector Karl Theodor of Bavaria issued his first edict against secret societies, a broadly worded ban that did not name the Illuminati specifically, but was understood to target them. A second, more explicit edict followed in March 1785, naming the Illuminati by name and declaring membership a criminal offense. A third edict came in August 1787, making participation in the order punishable by death. Weishaupt fled Bavaria in February 1785, before the second edict was issued. He crossed into the neighboring state of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, where Duke Ernest II offered him protection and eventually a pension. He would live the remaining 45 years of his life in Gotha, writing defensive pamphlets and philosophical treatises, never returning to Bavaria, never facing trial. The order he left behind dissolved under the pressure of the edicts and the Zwack raid. If this kind of documentary excavation is the sort of thing that holds your attention, the channel has more of it. The Zwack papers, published by the Bavarian government under the title Einige Originalschriften des Illuminatenordens, provided more than enough material for the order's enemies. The documents contained internal letters in which Weishaupt discussed strategy, complained about members, and outlined plans for expanding the order's influence. They contained the cipher keys the members used to communicate. They contained ritual texts. They contained lists of pseudonyms matched to real names. For anyone who wanted to argue that the Illuminati were a dangerous conspiracy, the papers were a gift. The Bavarian government printed them, distributed them, and encouraged other European governments to take notice. For 12 years, the published documents sat in archives and private collections, read mainly by Bavarian officials and clergymen. Then, in 1797, two books appeared almost simultaneously that transformed the Illuminati from a suppressed Bavarian secret society into a permanent fixture of conspiracy thinking. The first was Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, written by John Robison, a Scottish physicist and professor of natural philosophy at the University of Edinburgh. Robison had been a Freemason himself and had traveled in continental European lodge circles. His book argued that the Illuminati had not been destroyed by the Bavarian edicts. They had survived, gone deeper underground, infiltrated the Masonic lodges of France, and from there orchestrated the French Revolution. According to Robison, the entire sequence of events from 1789 onward, the storming of the Bastille, the execution of the king, the Reign of Terror, had been planned and directed by Weishaupt's organization, operating through its Masonic proxies. The second book was Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, written by Augustin Barruel, a French Jesuit priest who had fled to England during the Revolution. Barruel's argument was similar to Robison's but more elaborate. He described a three-layered conspiracy. First, the Enlightenment philosophers who had undermined Christianity, then the Freemasons who had provided the organizational network, and finally the Illuminati who had weaponized both to destroy the French monarchy. Barruel wrote with the authority of a man who had personally witnessed the terror. His book ran to 4 volumes and was translated across Europe. Neither Robison nor Barruel had evidence that the Illuminati had survived the 1785 suppression. Neither could demonstrate a connection between Weishaupt's Bavarian students and the Jacobin leaders in Paris. The chronology alone made the case weak. The Illuminati were suppressed in 1785. The revolution began in 1789. The documented Illuminati members were Bavarian academics and minor officials, not French political operatives. The published Zwack papers, which both authors relied on heavily, showed an organization that was struggling to maintain internal discipline in the early 1780s, not one capable of directing an international revolution a decade later. None of this mattered. The books were widely read, widely translated, and widely believed. They arrived at a moment when Europe was desperate for an explanation of why France had erupted, why the old order had collapsed so suddenly, and why the violence had been so extreme. The idea that a hidden hand had been at work satisfied a psychological need that the prosaic explanations, economic crisis, institutional rot, popular rage could not meet. The conspiracy theory offered a story with a villain, a plan, and a clear cause. The truth, that a small Bavarian secret society had been crushed by its own government before the revolution even began, was less satisfying. The books crossed the Atlantic. According to the Britannica entry on the Bavarian Illuminati, Robison's Proofs of a Conspiracy was read and discussed in the early American Republic, where fears about secret European influence on the new nation were running high. New England clergymen cited the book in sermons warning their congregations about the dangers of hidden subversion. The Illuminati theory became entangled with anxieties about Freemasonry in America, feeding into the anti-Masonic movement that would become the first significant third-party political movement in the United States during the 1820s and 1830s. The distance between what the Illuminati were and what they became in the popular imagination is the real subject of this story. The historical order existed for 9 years, from 1776 to 1785. It operated primarily in Bavaria and a few neighboring German states. Its membership, at its largest, numbered in the hundreds or low thousands. Its internal documents, preserved in the Zwack raid and published by the Bavarian government, reveal an organization consumed by petty internal disputes, personality conflicts between its 2 principal architects, chronic recruitment difficulties, and an inability to agree on whether its purpose was political reform, philosophical education, or both. Weishaupt spent as much time managing grudges as he did writing rituals. The mythological Illuminati, the version born in Robison and Barruel, is something else entirely. That version is immortal, borderless, omnipotent. It controls banks, governments, media, wars. It has survived every attempt to expose it. It pulls strings from the shadows while the visible world plays out a script written in advance. This version has persisted for more than 2 centuries. It has been adapted by every generation of conspiracy thinkers, from the anti-Masonic movement in 19th century America to the John Birch Society in the 20th to the online conspiracy ecosystems of the 21st. The word Illuminati itself has become a shorthand for any suspected hidden hand behind world events. What connects the 2 versions, the historical and the mythological, is the Zwack raid. Without those 400 pages of internal documents, neither Robison nor Barruel would have had the material to construct their theories. The Bavarian government, by publishing the papers, had intended to discredit the order and warn other states about the dangers of secret societies. The unintended consequence was the creation of a documentary foundation for a conspiracy theory that would outlive the order by centuries. The papers were real, the cipher keys were real, the membership lists were real, the plans for infiltrating Masonic lodges were real. These verifiable facts became the scaffolding on which an entirely unverifiable superstructure was built. Weishaupt himself lived quietly in Gotha until his death in 1830. He wrote philosophical works that almost nobody read. He maintained correspondence with a few former members. He watched from a distance as his name became associated with a conspiracy theory that bore no resemblance to the struggling university reading group he had founded in 1776. According to the biographical entry maintained by the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, which now occupies the institutional lineage of the university where Weishaupt once taught, his later years were spent in intellectual isolation, defended by the Duke of Gotha but ignored by the broader world. The order he built lasted 9 years. The theory it generated has lasted 240. The 400 pages that Bavarian police carried out of Xavier Zwack's house in Landshut are still doing their work, still being cited, still providing the raw material for a story that no amount of historical correction has been able to retire. The distance between what was found in that house and what has been made of it since is the distance between a fact and a mythology, and in the case of the Bavarian Illuminati, the mythology won. If buried histories and the strange afterlives of suppressed documents are the kind of thing that holds your attention, there is more of this work on the channel.